Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, Mr. Jokester, you're up this week. What do you bring to the table today?
I am bringing episode 1 from Eyes on the Prize 3. It's called America, Don't Look Away.
Yes.
And the story picks up in 1977 as there are lots of fires being set across the Bronx. In fact, it's called the arson capital of the world, or referenced that way in some news clips that they show.
Yeah.
And there is what sounds like archival audio from a news broadcast that lays out what the grift could be or what it was happening. So it says you could buy an apartment building for about $1,000, collect rent for a few years tax-free thanks to a city ordinance, a tax moratorium, and then burn it down for the insurance money. And this was all happening in the context of what was called planned shrinkage,
Right.
which is described in some more archival footage from Herman Badillo, who served in Congress and as deputy mayor for New York City. And he says the thinking is that you have two cities. One is the center where Manhattan is, and they get great services. The other is the periphery, like the Bronx. And it's basically abandoned by government. And these arsons seem to have been something that contributed to this process of planned shrinkage. So it was getting rid of people who were undesirable in this planned shrinkage kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also like part of the periphery and making the periphery worse,
Yes.
so to speak.
And out of
right?
sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Right.
And these arsons, were contributing to that. And so our story really starts how residents in the South Bronx organized themselves to claim some abandoned buildings with what they called sweat equity.
Yes.
They restored them, and then anybody in the neighborhood could apply for an apartment and pay for the apartment, claim it with the work that they put into it.
Yes.
And that organization is called Banana Kelly. It's still around today.
Yes.
It's named for the block that they started on with these buildings, because the block's kind of shaped like a banana.
Right.
And the street name is Kelly.
Was Kelly. Yep.
So
It is Kelly, I should say.
It's a great name.
Yes.
And yeah, kudos to them for the name and for some really incredible work. And then the episode moves into Philadelphia, and they talk about the 1980s and the AIDS epidemic and the story of Babashi, which is an organization founded by Rashida Abdul Kabir, and the work that they put in to advocate for Black men in Philadelphia who were dying of AIDS. And there's so much important history in this episode,
Yes.
movement work, and I'm really glad it's been documented in this way. And I'm grateful that I'm, slightly more aware of what was going on in this time period as people were dealing with all kinds of economic crises, the AIDS crisis. Yeah, so really grateful for this episode of Eyes on the Prize, and looking forward to the rest of the series too, honestly. But that's my super long introduction of the first episode of this docuseries. I wanted to try to get some context out there for us as we start to talk about this. But what did you think?
Yeah, no, that was great. That was a great intro. And even better was getting to watch this episode.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really glad that Eyes on the Prize is back, especially because, the earlier episodes of this docuseries were incredible, right? And just full of so much history and learning and lessons that we can still apply today. And this episode was no different.
Did you watch more of it?
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, of the original.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, so that it's back in that way. And so.
It was like episodes.
Yeah, no.
We just watched the one.
Right. And so it's great to get to, I think, pick back up with that learning. And as you introed, I think last week, like this sort of picks up where the old one left off. And so I think you're right. The story of what took place in the South Bronx was just wild. And, the story of Banana Kelly and the work that those folks did as part of that organization was really incredible and truly inspiring. But the initial story about what took place with the fires was honestly so wild. One of the news reports said that there were over 2,300 fires across the South Bronx that year alone, including around 40 fires in a 1 mile radius in a single night, like one single night. That's crazy. And so, to hear how New York's leadership namely Mr. Badillo, as you mentioned, talk about the situation and the people who live there was really sickening for me. Like it really was just awful to hear. And, he outright said that they wanted to keep poor people from coming into New York City, not living there. They wanted them to not even visit New York City.
Yeah.
And they wanted to keep those poor people. And he outright named them as being Black and Puerto Rican people, right? He wanted Black and Puerto Rican poor people to stay in the Bronx and to fend for themselves. And I just thought that that was really some truly vile thinking and vile policy. And the entire situation actually made me think about how that was and is the epitome of white supremacy, the othering of people, the degradation and the disregard of non-white people, the as you mentioned, the refusal to care for communities and provide services and resources to them. And I think that kind of white supremacist thinking and mindset and policy, expanded to other places and cities across the country.
Absolutely.
And we've seen how other quote unquote leaders like Badillo were inspired by that line of thinking, throughout our history.
Yeah, so I want to talk about Badillo for a second because I didn't actually look into much of his history aside from looking up what he had done.
Right.
But I think that he was describing the conditions. I think he was describing what was happening. I don't think he was advocating for that policy. I had that thought as he started to describe it.
Yeah.
Because he's from the Bronx. And so I don't think, I might be talking out of school here.
Yeah, no.
But my first interpretation was what you just said is like he was advocating.
That's how
for
I
it.
interpreted it watching it.
This is what we're doing. And then as I sort of listened to him and I was trying to think about how I want to talk about what he was saying, I thought to myself, oh, he's not advocating for, he's describing the thing that's happening to
describing the conditions.
His community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that would be a very different interpretation than of this. Just so that's honestly just the way I watched it and I thought about what I wanted to talk about. As I interpreted it.
As I heard him first speak, I was like, oh yeah, you're into this. And then as he continued speaking, I thought, no, I don't know. I think you're talking to the news about something that's happening.
Got you.
That's
we'll
how
have to do some. We'll have to do some research on that. Absolutely.
We should look into some more things that he did.
But I do think it's indicative whether or not he was talking about it or whether or not he was talking about the conditions that led to what was going on. Right. Like that's still vile in and of itself.
Yes. Because it means that other people were leading that charge.
Absolutely.
If it wasn't him and wasn't connected to him
and helped facilitate it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking of vile people, let's talk about Ronald Reagan.
I was curious when you didn't bring up Reagan in your intro. I know he wants to talk about Reagan.
I almost did because Reagan is the transition between the Bronx story and the AIDS story.
Yes.
But Reagan, the proto-Trump, the man who paved the way for both Bush presidencies and eventually Trump.
Yes.
The man who is on film in this documentary saying that he wants to welcome people into a national crusade to make America great again.
Oh, gosh.
The B-list movie actor turned conservative idol. He pops up in this episode about halfway through. As I said, he's the transition point for us to get from the Bronx into Philadelphia and talk about Babashi. So he's on a campaign visit to the South Bronx where folks from the neighborhood are shouting questions at him and he's getting really defensive and shouting back.
Yep.
But the thing that I think I admire and the thing that I think is happening there is the people in the neighborhood can see right through him. They know that the only reason he's there is to try to get their vote, to game the system so that he'll say that he's there to support them and to do things for them. And he's doing a terrible job. Job at earning their vote. And then the episode moves into talking about how much this administration decided that AIDS was not a big deal because it was mostly impacting gay men.
Right.
So one of the commentators in some more archival footage, and I tried to go back and find this person's name, and I didn't see it pop up at all.
Yep.
So I'm not sure who said this, but he's in the film from, it looks like the 80s. He's being interviewed, and this is archival footage. So he says, whenever there's a choice between do we go whole hog in this epidemic or do we keep the lid on domestic spending, the Reagan administration invariably chose to keep the lid on health spending. So that's what he said.
Yeah.
And, Reagan allowed so many people to die
Yes.
by ignoring the realities of this disease. He messed up the lives of so many people with his economic decisions, his drug war, his illegal military actions, his commentary to people, his narrative that he spun about how government is failing, the narratives around welfare queens, his consistent erosion of trust in government programs that funded all kinds of things. He laid the foundation for what it is that we're witnessing now.
Absolutely.
And there isn't enough time for me to say all I can and all I want to say about Ronald Reagan.
No, there is not. And there's certainly just not enough time for us to talk about how dangerous and damaging Ronald Reagan's administration was.
Yeah, because he came in with his B-list Hollywood smile
Yes.
and said something about compassionate conservatism and blah, blah, blah. And there was nothing compassionate about any of it.
Not at all. I think you made a good argument there about how his administration even still has an effect to this day, right? And I love what one of the women interviewed in this film said about him. She said, I don't think Reagan did anything good for Black people. And she's 100% correct about that. And so related to that, and to build on what you talked about with the AIDS epidemic, I think the film does a really great job, or the episode, I should say, does a really great job in sharing how AIDS was initially thought of as a white gay man's disease, but eventually health agencies and the government realized that a disproportionate number of Black and brown people were actually impacted by this disease.
Yeah.
And I think one of the archival news stories they featured had a reporter highlighting how Black and brown people were 20% of the population at the time, but accounted for 40% of the AIDS cases.
Yeah.
So to your point about Reagan messing up the lives of so many people by ignoring this epidemic is absolutely spot on. And so we talked about the Banana Kelly organization. You highlighted and you mentioned Babashi. I want to talk about them a little bit more. They're an incredible organization that is still active today. Babashi, as you said, was founded by Rashida Hassan, I think was her maiden name. And she's featured heavily in this piece. It was one of the first organizations dedicated to addressing the AIDS crisis. And they did that by focusing specifically on serving low-income people of color with HIV. And so they went into the projects, they went into schools, they went on the playgrounds, they went everywhere that they could to educate people about AIDS and how to stay safe. And they also trained up others to do street outreach and street organizing and consultations and trainings. And so, Babashi was just yet another organization and group of people who served as this example of stepping up to help others when the government refused to do so. And we have also seen examples of that throughout history, but I really appreciate both the highlighting of both Babashi and Banana Kelly in this piece for that alone.
Yeah, and two organizations that are still around today.
Yeah,
that started doing
incredible
stuff decades ago.
Yes.
And one of the other things that were the stories that really spoke to me is Rashida Hassan at the time went into I believe it was a gay club.
Yes.
And
yes.
So she's a Muslim woman in a hijab, and she shows up and says, I'm going to give a talk about AIDS and HIV at 2:00.
Yeah.
And there wasn't context. Was this 2 a.m. or 2 p.m? I'm not sure. Either way, incredible work to show up to a place and be like, this is information that we need to share and to go out and do it.
And I think there was a gay man who commented like she was there, and like obviously she looked very different than everyone else at the club, and so we took her seriously.
Because he said, this Muslim woman is here to tell me about how to save my own life.
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna listen.
I need to listen to this.
Absolutely.
And I think that's I don't know, that story about what she did and then his response and reaction to it was very moving to me in terms of real care for people and reaching them where they are, and then showing up with real authenticity to say, these are the things that I think we all need to know. And I want to share this with you in this moment.
Yeah, her initial story was beautiful so she was working in the medical field and having patients and talking about the real impact of this disease and watching folks wither away and die. And, that changes you and that sticks with you. And so, she really was motivated to do this work from this beautiful intrinsic place of wanting to care for, as you say, and help others. And that really shined through, I should say, in all that she did.
Yeah, and it was a nice juxtaposition for some of the other things that were happening in the second half of this episode, because the second half really hit home again for me how devastating this crisis was, just how many lives were taken by this disease, and what it might have looked like to try to get ahead of it and communicate more about what the CDC and other health organizations knew about it.
Right.
And you see that juxtaposition of what if there were more people like Rashida and more organizations like Babashi around doing that work, and that if like the Reagan administration had taken it seriously, what would that have looked like? It's a tragedy. It's a failure of government that chose not to do much. And again, chose not to do much because that was the political narrative that Reagan wanted to spin, is that government can't solve things.
Yep.
And so that's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, absolutely.
If you say government can't do it and then you don't do it because you don't think government can, that is...
Or for whatever reason, you don't do it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then there's also a clip of Jerry Falwell saying that AIDS is generally believed to be derived from gay promiscuity, and that's a violation of God's law. And he says, quote, "We pay the price when we violate the laws of God," which I thought was disgusting.
Yeah.
And this is the same man who said that segregation was God's will.
Right.
In response to Brown v. Board, he called Desmond Tutu a phony. So he's got a lot to answer for what he did in his life as well.
Yes, he
does. You know, him and Reagan can both look up at us from hell as we're recording this. And when you hear it on Wednesday, just know that we know what you did.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was awful to have to watch this episode and see both of those individuals in this.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that also stirred me a lot was, I'm going back to Rashida here because she was just so incredible. She was maybe the keynote, but she just gave a speech at this 1986 AIDS March in Philadelphia, and they featured part of that rally in this film. And, you know, she basically said, get on the right side of history here or we will haunt you. And I think a lot of folks need to hear that and hear that deeply and have it resonate with them because, yeah. I think another great piece of analysis that was addressed in this episode in the context of the AIDS crisis were the issues of power and funding.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about that a little bit. And I'm going to quote Rashida again because I think she summed up what's at the core of the issue really well.
Yeah.
So she said, quote, "The issue of funding became a major activity. Each group, whether they're gay white men or gay black men or IV drug users and their advocates or community advocates such as myself, were having to say, you've got to take care of our group. And so what it does is pit one part of the community against another so that we're actually diverted from unity to face the federal government, to face our state and local governments, to say we, the community, are suffering from this illness. They are literally pitting us against one another based on how the money is going to be divided." And so I think there's a lot to take from that analysis in terms of how money is connected to power and how the powerful are in control of the resources, you know, particularly thinking about our government to help people and what that says about our society. And then taking it sort of a step further, I think there's a lesson in there about the effectiveness of the strategy of solidarity and the power of solidarity. And what Rashida spoke to, and Rashida spoke to this in her AIDS March speech that I referenced. What does it mean to work in and be in solidarity with one another when we recognize that we have a shared struggle? And I think that lesson in particular is one that we really need to heed in our present day.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, all of the things we've been talking about
Absolutely, right?
For weeks now. So, yeah, great stuff. Let's talk about application.
Okay.
How do we apply what we've learned from this really excellent episode of Eyes on the Prize to our daily lives and work? My application comes from Carol Waring, who was working with Banana Kelly, and she was talking about their recruitment efforts. She said, quote, "We knocked on your door. We made people feel like you have to be there because you're an important part." And I think that people in general right now are hungry for that invitation into clear action, into real change. There are a lot of truly horrific things going on right now. And I think similar to what you said about being in solidarity, I think lots of people are really open to finding their place in movement work, whatever that might look like to them. So my application here is for all of us to think about how we fit into movement work. because there's a lot to be done. Even if it's not super public work, it doesn't have to be a protest. It doesn't have to be anything. It can be the thing that you like to do, or you are energized about doing, or the thing that you're good at that not a lot of other people will do for a movement.
Absolutely.
There's room for all kinds of things in supporting resistance. So if you're not already, get into an organization or start a local one that you can support your neighbors. Just a simple thing of maybe you get together and you make soup for people or whatever. And then invite people you know into that work, because it's infectious, I think, when you can invite people into a clear, purpose-driven thing, organization, project, campaign, whatever it is. People are looking for things to do in response to all of the things that are going on right now.
Gestures aggressively in the air.
Gesture aggressive. It's not vague. It's
not vaguely. It's aggressively. Absolutely. I love that. I love that so much. I think my application is related to that. And I feel bad, like you earlier. I don't remember who said these quotes that I want to share, but one of the folks was with Banana Kelly was talking about the organization itself. And he said, quote, Banana Kelly stepped in where local government, federal government, state government should have stepped in and tried to stop what was happening in the South Bronx. And then related to that, another person said, quote, if you want something done, you must do it yourself. You can't really depend on our government to give you anything unless you force them.
Yep.
You know, and so like you said, we've got to do this work for us. We've got to figure out how to work together for what's right in the face of everything that's happening right now. And so I think the lessons here from the members of Banana Kelly absolutely still ring true today, all these years later. This was back in the 70s, so all of these years later.
Yeah, and I think, both of our applications ties into this concept from abolition that we have to create things outside of the context of what we know now.
Yes.
And we have to create the world we want to live in. Because we'll need all kinds of stuff on the other side of the prison industrial complex and police going away. And we have to get there gradually. And part of that gradualness is figuring out how to do stuff for us and for each other and with one another.
100%. I love that.
All right, let's talk about homework.
Okay.
What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? I want to learn more about Banana Kelly because it's still in operation today. And so I'm super curious about how they're operating, given how much has changed in New York since the late 70s and how much, real estate has changed then, how much the economy has changed. Like all of these changes, what does it sort of look like now? I'm also curious, what would sweat equity look like now?
Right.
It feels like because that area of New York had been abandoned so aggressively, it felt like they had an opportunity to do those things that they did.
Right.
And
certainly now the landscape
sort
has
of
changed.
get a pass, and now the landscape has changed in lots of places. But I wonder what it would look like in places that have been abandoned in similar ways.
That's a great idea.
So that's sort of my homework.
I love that. I'll co-sign that homework, and I think I will add that we should also look into Babashi as well, because as I mentioned earlier, they're still in operation today.
Yes.
And so I think there's a lot we could learn from both of those incredible organizations and the work that they did and the work that they continue to do today to support people and be in community with folks. I also think we've got to keep watching the rest of this season of Eyes on the Prize. There's just no question in my mind that we've got to see the rest of this. So I suggest we commit to bringing the rest of the episodes to the table throughout the year, if that sounds good to you.
Sounds great to me.
I love it.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll figure out a schedule and keep that moving.
Yeah, so stay tuned, folks.
All right, well, that's it for this episode of Eyes on the Prize and today's episode of Interdependent Study. But Damien, you're up next time. What are you bringing to the table in our next episode?
I am so excited to bring our April book to the table for us to talk about next week. It is time. The book we are reading and we'll talk about is called Abolition, Politics, Practices, Promises, Volume 1. And it is by the one and only Angela Davis. So this is a book we have obviously had on our list for a long time. And
since it came out, I think.
Since it came out. And I'm thrilled that we finally get to talk about it. So here's a description of it on Haymarket Books' website. Quote, for 50 years, Angela Davis has been at the forefront of collective movements for abolition and feminism and the fight against state violence and oppression. Abolition, Politics, Practices, Promises, the first of 2 important new volumes, brings together an essential collection of Davis's writing over the years, showing how her thinking has sharpened and evolved even as she has remained uncompromising in her commitment to collective liberation. In pieces that address the history of abolitionist practice and thought in the United States and globally, the unique contributions of women to abolitionist struggles, and stories and lessons of organizing inside and beyond the prison walls, Davis is always curious, always incisive, and always learning. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I know we're going to enjoy this one. Yeah. And I can't wait for our conversation about it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things from the preface of this book is Angela Davis talks about how she put together all of these essays and the different pieces of the book. And one of the things that she said she had to do was sort of let go of the need to update any language that was used that maybe is no longer used or has evolved in the time that she's been doing this work. And so that's one of the things too that I appreciated about the beginning of the book is that she named that and said, hey, not all of this is in today's terms, in the language that we use today, because I've been writing about this for a long time. That's not how she phrased it. That's how I'm interpreting. I'm understanding. She's been doing this work so long that the language has evolved with her, and so I think that's over 50 years, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm excited.
Good stuff. All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what we want you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.